Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast post-game edition from the Oregon football coaches box at Memorial Stadium. Matt Prehm, Erik, Skopil, post-game edition. Oregon 42-24. My first reaction on the podcast is a little bit different than my first reaction when clock hit zero. Oregon is not happy.
No.
Like the offense puts up, let's just pull the stats here up real quick. 586 yards of offense, almost 600 yards of offense. They score 42 points. And the theme of the day from Dan Lanning, from Bo Nix, from Alex Forsyth is the offense didn't really play all that well.
It's the most, by the way, yards Oregon has, or I should say Cal has given up under Justin Wilcox ever.
Yep.
6 years. And it was nearly the most points they'd allowed. I think the most was 45, isn't that we looked it up coming in? They get to 42. And you get why, though, because Cal really never stopped Oregon until they got the ball into the red zone.
Yeah.
There was, I think, one punt early on.
First drive of the game.
Everything after that, they put the ball like within the 10-yard line. And there were 3 opportunities. They come away with no points when they get a ball down there. They obviously had the interception off Troy Franklin's hands into Oren Patu's hands for interception. And then the 2 times they're turned away on 4th down. And, yeah, it was a strangely somber press conference from like everybody who spoke. I mean, obviously there were things to be happy about. Lanning had.
He even emphasized that. He's like, look, I'm happy we won.
I think he felt like he needed to clarify it because it comes across like, hey, we kind of are complaining about a lot of things. But actually, that was interesting. One of the last question we asked Dan and I asked was just kind of like, what can you take anything? Is there a positive or anything you can take away from being turned around on 4th? Because they've been so good on 4th this year. He said maybe they kind of need to get humbled a little bit.
It's not automatic.
Yeah, that it's not automatic, that you're going to get some resistance on those 4th down plays. And they are extremely aggressive on 4th down. That's kind of an identity thing with this team offensively. Both said the exact same thing. And you get a sense that, like, hey, it's not always going to be perfect. And to their credit, they still scored 42 points in this game. But which, by the way, those listening might recognize, I predicted this exact score.
Well done.
42-24. I said exactly that. But it was very close to being your score, which was 56-24, if they would have pushed in a couple more touchdowns.
Yeah, and I think that's like the big takeaway here is this offense, they score 42 points, 600 yards basically of yardage, and they're disgusted. I don't know, maybe that's too harsh of a term, but that's how I think that tells you how highly they think of themselves in a good way of what this unit could do. Because look, a lot of people make fun of Justin Wilcox. A lot of Duck fans make fun of the way the Cal program is run, how they recruit, whatever. But Cal's defense historically under Wilcox every single year is one of the better units in the conference. They don't give up big plays. They make you drive the length of the football field and really earn every yard, every score that you get. And Oregon threw them around like rag dolls when they weren't imploding themselves. And it's just I think it's the right type of mindset. It's one that you are happy to see walking away from this game is they score 42 points, 586 yards of total offense, and they are not happy. And that tells you the potential this team has for future games, which Bo even brought up.
Yeah.
Like we need to be careful because this might not happen down the road against tougher teams.
Against a little better competition that has a stronger offense, say a Washington, a Utah, maybe even an Oregon State. This might not be a win, or this is a close game that comes down to the wire. And you also have to acknowledge that, like, one of the things we talked about in the week leading up to it is it was really important, I think, for this team to kind of get some momentum. And in a strange way, I feel like they were able to maintain that even with because they're so disappointed with things. Like it's easy to get complacent almost when things are going really well.
And you're winning big every single week.
They win by 18 points. This was not a competitive game. Anybody who watched this understood it was basically over after the first drive of the second half. At the same time, you do now, I think, and at least maybe this is good, I think, like psychology. This is good coaching from Dan Lanning of making sure that the carrot continues to be there of like, you guys did a lot of things really well, but boy, are there some things that we need to work on. And he ran through after the game. One of the other questions I asked was like, what were some things that stood out? He said, red zone defense, pre-snap penalties. There's a couple other ones I'm blanking on it, but there are
big explosion plays.
Big explosion plays on defense. There are like 4 or 5 things that he pointed like right away of like, we need to do better this, and this. There is much, I think, a lot of room to improve with this team. There certainly wasn't maybe an area that was even perfect in this game, like one specific area. But I think you come away feeling like this is actually maybe somewhat encouraging that it wasn't perfect because the team's taking it kind of hard considering they did put up Again, I like the most yards that Justin Wilcox's defense has ever given up at Cal. They almost scored more points than Wilcox has allowed at Cal. And you win really convincingly at Cal to now be 5-0. You maintain your first place in the conference, all these sort of things. They weren't satisfied is, I think, the easiest way to put it.
Yeah, and I think that tells you the maturity level and maybe the realization that this team has of, hey, we can still accomplish all our goals, being Pac-12 champion, being in the college football playoff discussion if we play good. And they are realizing they're having the self-awareness and the maturity level to understand that this was not our best effort and that's not acceptable. And we have to give that every week because we don't have a margin for error. If they lose, they're out of the playoff discussion entirely. I mean, we could argue at another time how real it is.
Right.
But they're still in it right now. And the conference championship is theirs to lose. They're in sole place, first place. They control their destiny, and you don't want to have a crack to allow having to rely on other factors in play here. And I think that's notable. I think that's impressive to see. I don't know if last year's team kind of handled it this way when they had, a lackluster performance or what have you. Yeah. Let's shift here a little bit. What did you think of just the run game? I was surprised. 174 yards. That's normally a good number, but their performance wasn't nearly as effective. We saw them get stuffed multiple times on fourth downs, fourth and shorts in particular too. Overall, just a weird game. Like there's things to like, but at the same time, there's certainly some things where you're kind of like, that wasn't very good.
Yeah, the run game didn't really ever get going the way you'd want it to. The long was 18 yards. That was Nick's, and I think that was on a scramble play.
It had been late in the game, too.
Yeah, I think it was to convert, pick up a first down. The running backs, Bucky Irving, 10 carries, 32 yards. That's the most the team's contained him on the ground all day. Whittington had a couple nice runs, 10 for 66. But yeah, there really wasn't quite the explosiveness, and that's a credit to Cal, I think. And that was kind of one of the things we talked about leading up to this. Of, they still run for 174 yards, which is a pretty nice number. It's about 70 yards below their season average this year. But you're right, there was a lack of pop to it, and I think a little bit of credit to Cal, and I think another point of self-reflection for the offense, especially the offensive line, because I felt I didn't feel like the holes were quite as big as they've been previous weeks. And again, I want to give a lot of credit to Cal because this is the second-ranked rush defense in the conference coming in. This is a rush defense that, or defense in general under Wilcox, has always been really good up front. And this is not like a banner year for Cal defense, but there's still talent there. And they were able to really keep Oregon's run game in check. But I think to maybe put a positive spin on it, what was really impressive was how they countered that with the pass and how certain drives were. I think some of the early drives was kind of like they kind of tried to force the run. I think there was a series where they just ran it 3 straight times. That might have been the
first drive,
right? And punt it. After that, they kind of started figuring out like, hey, we can kind of.
They're exposed a little bit in the perimeter in the passing game.
Well, Cal was, yeah, and I was just going to say, I think they also figured they could manufacture almost this run game with a lot of running back passes. Like that was one of the big takeaways we talked with Dan about was 10 catches, that was 176 yards, 2 touchdowns to running backs in this game. Whittington had a receiving touchdown and a couple big ones. Bucky, the same thing, and even Dollars late had 2 catches for
48
for long yards. And I think that was maybe kind of the substitution for a run game where they still tried to push it quite a bit.
Yeah.
40 carries, only 4.4 yards. This is, I think, statistically your worst run effort since Georgia. But they were able to kind of utilize some of those skill players out in space. And I was really impressed with, really Bo's ability, I think, to just kind of find and not force it downfield, right? He has 2 interceptions in this game, by the way. We have
one of which I don't really have a problem with at all.
I didn't think either were terrible. We had one where Troy kind of drops it. He kind of forced it into. I think that one is a little iffy. And then one's the very last play of the half, and they're just
trying to get a touchdown.
A jump ball. That's in fantasy football, by the way, the most frustrating play possible. You lose 2 points because the guy's just trying to throw a touchdown on a meaningless play that never works. But who cares about fantasy football? I guess I do, but
I do too, but not college.
Not on this podcast.
Not on this podcast either. Bo Nix, 412 yards passing, 27 of 35.
Awesome.
11 different receivers catch passes in this game. There were a couple of drops. We had Chris Hudson drop, which would have been like a 65, 70-yard touchdown pass, probably at worst like a 60-yard catch.
Yeah.
We saw the interception thrown to Franklin that hit his hands. There was another one that got deflected that was close to being a touchdown. So you had some drops, and you also had an injury.
Yep,
and
this is a big one.
Chase Cota goes down in the first quarter, I think, of that game, and we're going to have to play almost 50 minutes of football without its second best receiver. Never returned to the field, was in street clothes in the second half. Dan Lanning says it's going to be they're going to need to get back to Eugene to find out what the real issue is here with Chase Cota. And to me, that tells me just if this is us speculating, when the coach doesn't really have an idea and doesn't sound very good, it sounds like he could be out a week. He could be out a couple weeks. We don't know, but I would be pleasantly surprised if he sees the field next week at Colorado.
And I don't know how much you need him.
Yes, you don't need Chase Cota against Colorado. You shouldn't.
And we have to acknowledge also that there was a moment where it looked like they were going to lose their top two receivers because Troy Franklin goes down, and I have hypothesized that might have been just a really heady play to fake it, kind of take it, pretend like you're hurt, and give an opportunity for the offense to get another free play. Regardless, it doesn't seem like they dodged a bullet. He's not hurt. He played the whole second half and really was kept kind of in check in this game, better than most teams. They just had 3 catches for 34 yards. But back to Cota, I asked Nix about that, and he just kind of said, that's a veteran on the field, and he fixes so many things with that experience and his ability to, not just when the ball is thrown his way, impact things in a positive manner. That was a big loss for this offense. And it's obvious the offense found other ways, and it wasn't to the receivers.
You would think, hey, Thornton, this is your opportunity. He got in there, he had a catch
for 7 yards, probably had his most snaps that he's had for most of the season, but it was running backs and it was tight ends. And, we have to acknowledge, how about Patrick Herbert?
Yeah, touchdown, 40-yard touchdown reception at the end of the game.
And the tight ends in general, like Maliki Madova, I think that's a season high, 3 catches, 45 yards.
Ferguson didn't do much, but it's what Dan was talking about is that's a very selfless group. They worry more about the unit's overall success than their individual success. And you saw that today. 2 guys, and Maliki and Patrick, that haven't really done much statistically. They all play a ton,
right? But
statistically, those 2 guys really haven't done much yet. And this was by far both their guys, statistically speaking, best games. And he praised McCormick and he praised Ferguson for having just as much enthusiasm about their personal plays in previous games, but today for those 2 guys having big games.
I would like a stat check on this from somebody. When was the last time Oregon had I think it's almost exactly 300 yards receiving from non-receivers in this
That's
game.
Crazy.
You go tight ends and you go running backs. It's like
I think that's a Nate Kruger. We know he listens.
All right, Nick. Sorry, now he's not.
Now I'm not going to do it now.
But Nate, I'm curious on that one. When was the last time Oregon? Because I'm pretty sure that's about what it adds up to. I'm doing the math, looking at the stat sheet right now. It's very close to 300 yards, regardless if it is or isn't. If it's up a yard, it's down a yard. Really impressed with the way that Bo was able to react to. Hey, I'm without some key guys. Seven McGee didn't make this trip. We have to acknowledge that. That's 2 of your top 5 or 6 receivers, and the offense, at least from a passing game, I thought was really effective. And again, stat-wise, it's funny. He was so kind of somber, maybe is the right word. He wasn't down, but he was so kind of lacking enthusiasm in his postgame. You think he played really poorly. I think he even said, "I didn't play my best."
Yeah,
it was 27 for 35 for 412 yards and was a part of 6 total touchdowns. He ran in 3 as well on the ground. That was one of the. By the way, we talked about the run game. That was one of the things that was able to work was him running the football close to the goal line. He got in, I think, all 3 times they really tried that play, which kind of begs the question of that one where they do get stuffed, Jordan James get kind of stonewalled, and could they have just kind of put it under center and run it there? But obviously that did impact the game. It's just kind of a question you have to ask yourself.
We're going to take a quick break here. But before we do, we've kind of had some hot take questions after games.
Oh.
Here's one.
Okay.
Bo Nix is the odds-on, clear-cut, going-away favorite to win Offensive Pac-12 Player of the Year. I can't think of someone that's better.
Caleb,
that means more to team success.
I think I would agree he should be the favorite. I think Caleb Williams, because of the market he plays in and because of the team he plays for, is going to be a contender. I think DTR, Oregon beating him head-to-head and Bo Nix outplaying him and outclassing him gives Oregon the edge there. And then I would say Cam Rising at Utah, who was the first team all-conference quarterback last year. A lot of good quarterbacks this year.
Oh, yeah, very good.
Rising would be probably the dark horse, but he just got hurt and didn't play in a game. I don't know if that eliminates him, missing one game. But those would be the guys. And we haven't even mentioned Michael Penix leads the NCAA in passing yards. But like I would say it's Nick's.
Nick's reward to lose.
I think he's ahead personally. And if they run the table, which again has happened twice since the Pac-12, or it hasn't happened since the Pac-12, but it's happened like twice in the last 20-something years in the Pac-10 and Pac-12 combined. I think he has to be the favorite, especially with the season he's putting up. I mean, you mentioned it on Twitter. I think with 11 touchdowns now, he's like 3 shy. This is on the ground.
It's 15. Okay. Marcus Mariota has 15 rushing touchdowns. That's the most in a single season by an Oregon quarterback. That's the record. And he has 11 now. So he's 4 away from tying, 5 away from getting that award. And you look at this, and they've got a month of November to play football. Colorado next week, Washington, Utah, Oregon State. Yeah. And then you sit here and say there's probably a good chance. They
should have 6 games.
They should have 6 more games left. I like the odds that he scores 5 and 6, especially when this is like the 4th time this season he's had a multiple rushing touchdown game. Maybe like the 3rd time he's had 3.
It's the 3rd time he's had 3. Yeah, it was BYU, I think Stanford in this game.
Yeah, so he's racking up touchdowns. It's an impressive run by Bo Nix. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back, talk defense, maybe look ahead quickly to what this means moving forward for the Ducks. All right, welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast post-game edition. Again, 42-24 victory for the Oregon Ducks. Now, defensively, this was one where the stats maybe don't necessarily look bad, don't necessarily look good, but a lot of it came in garbage time.
Sure did.
Where it was 28 to 10 third quarter, maybe even 35 to 10. I can't remember the scoring sequences here, but Oregon put a lot of their second unit in that 4th quarter, and Cal moved the football. They scored a couple touchdowns, 2 touchdowns in the 4th quarter, picked up a lot of their yards, at least half probably. Obviously half their points came in the 4th quarter. And so you look at this and, you're not happy that Oregon's defense gave up some points, but a lot of it, again, garbage play. Doesn't really matter. I mean, outside of a stylistic-looking win, 42 to 10 looks a hell of a lot better than 42 to 24.
150 out of 328 yards, I think.
Yeah, so very close to half.
So that's about 400 yards of total offense. But about 150 out of 400. I forgot to count the rush yards for the total game, but. They did a lot of stuff with their backup in, and I think if you want to be alarmist, you'd say, man, it's not great that you're giving up 2 touchdown drives, including a really long pass to Cal's backup quarterback. His first touchdowns, by the way, I think as a Golden Bear. At the same time, you go, Oregon was not playing at starters basically at all. They had a couple. I think their secondary was for one of the drives. Some of the veterans were out there, but. It was a lot of Keith Brown. Jeffrey Bossa, we haven't mentioned, got ejected because of a targeting call. I think that was the right call on this one. I don't know if I've agreed on all of them this year, but I think this one was the right one. So we got a lot of Keith Brown. We got a lot of Jackson LeDuc. We saw a bunch of other guys cycle through, but there were a lot of young guys who hadn't played a lot on those drives. Yep. Overall, I actually felt like the defense played one of its better games. I know Cal's not a great offense, but up until they brought in the backup quarterback, it was 10 points. Yeah. When did they score that? Their second to last touchdown there?
Scoring plays. We'll look here.
Why don't we take a peek? About 7:40 to play. So up until about 9 minutes to go in the 4th quarter, they had 10 points. Yeah. I think you'll take that. You would take it in part because they kind of forced the issues. I'm guessing you're pretty close on your havoc plays, by the way.
Yeah.
A lot of sacks, a lot of back plays in the backfield.
Tackles for loss.
2 interceptions. Does a kick block? Did that count?
Yeah, I think so.
That should feel like a havoc play to me.
Yeah, when's the last time we've seen Oregon defense, or I guess special teams, block a punt or block a field goal? We almost got a blocked punt, too. We almost had it a couple times.
We should have. Dante Manning should have had one in the first half.
And then we had Gonzo block the kick. I know the answer. It came in 2017. I don't remember the game, though.
I don't remember the play, but it's
from the University of Oregon stats department, so they obviously know it's there. Just can't remember what it was when it came against. But that's how long it's been since Oregon special teams were able to make a play like that and get the ball back. And TV showed a very happy Dan Lanning mean mugging his special teams unit as they were coming off in celebration.
Good couple of weeks for special teams, by the way, right? They had the onside kick last week, block kick here. That's nice to have that consecutive weeks.
There were some people talking about like, hey, gosh, this team's defense on third down and fourth down isn't very good. And I think some singular plays maybe overshadow the length of this game and how good they were on third and fourth down, because Cal was 4 for 15 on third downs, 2 for 2 on fourth. So yes, like they weren't good on fourth, but you look at that and you take 6 for 17 on third and fourth down conversions combined. I think you're happy with that.
You're okay with it. And I think the part that's encouraging is a lot of those happen in the middle of the game where you're pulling away.
Yeah.
One of the fourth downs for sure came on when the backup Milner was in, and it was like a 4th and 12, and they threw it out there to the tight end. He got absolutely leveled. I think the one thing, and as you mentioned earlier, I think you're a little bit disappointed, maybe a little bit concerned with, is just this was a game where some of the receivers beat Oregon downfield more so than what we've seen recently, right? One of the things we talked about in this podcast was like, man, teams are throwing the football at a high rate, and there's still 328 yards passing from Cal between the two quarterbacks. But it was kind of like they're kind of doing it differently than what the stat sheet says, because you'd go, man, there's a lot of underneath stuff where you have missed tackles from linebackers and safeties and maybe corners. This is a game where they actually really challenged Oregon vertically and had some success. 2 long pass plays, one for about 57 yards was a long one to Jeremiah Hunter there. I think that was to lead to Cal's first touchdown that put them ahead 10-7 early second quarter. And you just hadn't seen a whole lot of them get beat over the top like that. I think you're a little bit discouraged. At the same time, I know Sturdivant and
you said all week they've got really good dudes.
They've got some guys out there. I mean, Sturdivant was a top 150 recruit a couple of years ago. Hunter is one of the best receivers in the conference and was a borderline 4-star. I think the cycle before that. So they've got some guys out there. And Plummer, and this is the point we tried to make, was if you give the guy some time, he's actually a pretty decent quarterback. But the issue was he didn't have a lot of time. I don't have the exact hurry stats. I think he was sacked 2 or 3 times. Does it have quarterback hits? It only says 2. That seems very low.
Well, I do know, talking to the stat crew for Oregon, they're going to go back and change some of this. They're going to chart the game.
Okay.
Because I brought this up. I was like, hey, this can't be right from a stat perspective. And they said, oh, no, that will get fixed. I got to think the hurries were probably close to 10. I mean, they could not block.
No,
especially when DJ was out there. We should know we didn't get an answer on his status. He'd been in and out all game with the injuries. He was playing, not playing, playing again. But when he was out there, good Lord, was he basically unblockable for California's offensive line. He only finishes the game with 3 total tackles, but 2 of them are sacks.
Well,
and I felt like he had even more than that.
Yeah, I know, and I'm looking at Keanu Williams, so I just wanted to shout out. And they have him with no tackles and 1 pass breakup, but I thought he had a strip sack where he knocked the ball and it was recovered 10 yards behind the line. So that had to have been a sack and a forced fumble. I wanted to mention it because, we talk about injuries, talk about DJ. It made me think that, Take Taimani did not make the trip.
Yep.
Was kind of expected. He didn't practice Tuesday, didn't practice Wednesday, suffered an ankle injury against UCLA. I thought Keanu was the player going in. I mentioned he could probably see an uptick in snaps, and he did. And I don't have snap counts here. If they don't have the accurate sack and quarterback hits, the snap counts probably aren't going to be accurate either. But I think Keanu probably had to have played this season and probably a career high in snaps in this game. And I thought was really impactful. It seemed like he was in the backfield a lot, made a lot of plays on Plummer. So good to see a young player make plays like that. Dorless after the game was also pretty complimentary of him. But I thought they did a great job up front of forcing the issue on Plummer. Got beat a couple times deep, but all in all, I thought the defense played one of its better games. And I know you don't want to see 24 points against Cal, and those touchdowns do count. But as you said earlier, a lot of it was with a lot of backups on the field. And I think, the funny thing is if you look at the stats this year for Oregon in general on defense, a lot of it's been like you got backups secondary, and it's your second and third string guys out there at the very end of a game. Like how many, and this is I think probably to clean up, maybe ask Dan about, but how many times does a game? It seems like every game the other team scores a late touchdown on the second team defense, and that happens again here twice with the backup quarterback for Cal, which you're not thrilled with, but I thought it was a pretty solid defensive effort overall.
I one comment about that, and then we can wrap this up. But I saw Jeff Schwartz point out that it feels like you said, a lot of these teams, the last 7 wins, a lot of these teams have tacked on 10, 7, 14 points in the fourth quarter against Oregon's backups. And that could be something that the committee goes and looks at and maybe criticizes or holds Oregon to. You have the 49-3, and then you've got a couple games where you should have maybe won 59-10 and you won 42-24. And this is why we're maybe going to put you at 7 instead of 5. That's just splitting hairs here, but that's like the margin they're working at right now.
I was going to say, I think you mentioned earlier when we'll get to college football playoff talk, that'll probably be Tuesday when they release the first rankings. I think we're going to have some kind of reaction show to that. I know we will. These are the kind of things you might get into. This is way down the line here, because I think it's going to be, looking at the way everything projects, it's going to be really tight for those last spot or two. And Oregon, I think, will have a shot at it.
Yep.
A lot of it's going to depend on what everybody else does, but you're right. It could end up being kind of a little bit of a situation of, kind of like you said, splitting hairs, of picking apart it and going, well, they did give up this. The score was 18 points to Cal. Shouldn't Oregon be more than an 18 they covered? But it shouldn't have been a little bit more. So, no, I think there might be something to that. And ultimately, you're a little disappointed, I think, with just the way the game ended, because it could have easily been more than that. I'm, of course, thrilled with the way the game ended, because I nailed the score. I got it perfect.
Kudos to you.
And pat on the back.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on the post-game edition of the Awesome Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back on Monday with the mailbag. Make sure to send those questions in now. Start doing it now so that we can formulate a big show for you guys on Monday. And until then, you've been listening to the Awesome Audibles podcast.
Talk to you there, folks. Peace.